you'll probably all get a prompt that the recording is in progress. So as always, the recording will be available on our YouTube page. A lot of listeners and people have been wanting to listen to the past recordings. They are all available on our YouTube page. And if you're still subscribed to the emailers that you have been getting, you would all have a copy of the link. The question and answer box is a separate icon, and please use the question and answer box to write in any specific questions that you may have, whether they are regarding to the content which will be delivered today, or if there are any questions that are burning questions related to pacifier protection, any questions related to the codes applicable in your part of the world, or any questions related to compliance, conformity, or means of conformity. All these questions are welcome. Like many a times, we will be having a poll or a brief poll question. You would see this icon blinking on your screen or somewhere. And that's when a poll should pop up on your screen. And I would welcome all the listeners to quickly answer all the questions. Brief about me, in case you're seeing me for the first time. My name is Abhishek Chabra. I have been working for Thomas Bell-Wright for good 7 years and have a very good relationship when it comes to the conformity assessment industry. I usually get very, very excited when anybody wants to talk about compliance. Have been involved with various aspects of compliance, accreditation bodies, standard writing bodies, codes and standards. I have a small group of professionals called Gurus of Tech, and anybody and everybody related to various aspects of compliance are related to me in some or the other way, a good relationship with many of them. So that's about me. I represent a company called Thomas Bell-Wright International Consultants. We are in the 26th year now. We did 25 years last year in the midst of Corona. And we started off 26 years ago as a curtain wall testing laboratory. A small video that's running on your screen shows how subcontractors will come and build mock-ups of building envelope, curtain wall system, glazing system, and we would hence test and validate their behavior for air infiltration, water infiltration, and one among several properties which check the functioning of the curtain wall or the cladding system. 10 years ago or over 10 years ago, we got into doing fire testing. Started off with a 3x3 furnace and a reaction to fire equipment as per the American standard, the Steiner tunnel. And over the last 8-9 years, we have expanded heavily in offering a very, very wide range of services related to compliance of passive fire protection. So we have got a slew of equipment for reaction to fire as per the European norms, American norms, to very large rigs where we conduct large-scale fire propagation testing for cladding, building envelope systems as per the British standard, the BS 8414, as per the American standard, NFPA 285. We also test the perimeter fire barriers as per the ASTM E2307. And to add it all up, we now have 4 large furnaces, vertical, horizontal, load-bearing, R&D. So we try to test almost anything and everything when it comes to passive fire protection. And we are a growing certification body offering very good conformity assessment services. And one of us, and our certification mark here is Mu'tamad, which is demonstrating compliance to various properties, mainly passive fire protection. This is the last episode of the series. We started doing awareness webinars last year as the pandemic hit all of us. And this is the second series. So the first series started more generally, where we were talking about several aspects related to passive fire protection, almost you can say an introduction to what passive fire protection is, how it functions, linkages with the UAE Fire and Life Safety Code, and various aspects of passive fire protection were covered almost as an introduction. The QR code here leads you directly to the recordings. If you want to bookmark, you can quickly scan your screens or take a snapshot if you're listening to this on a mobile device. We then, in December last year, started the next series, or the series 2, about the passive fire protection awareness program, where we stepped a little deeper into what passive fire protection conformity mechanisms are, what are the test standards, and we dug deeper into various different test methods. For example, we did a very good and well received a program on the BS8414 test, because the standard got revised last year, perimeter fire barriers, a very interesting session worth listening to about codes and compliances in fire safety, comparing how the compliance requirements in the United Arab Emirates compare with the current compliance requirements and the evolving compliance requirements in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We took a deeper look at resistance to fire testing and reaction to fire testing standards. And the last month session was giving an insight to buyers, contractors, and sellers on how, while procuring passive fire protection, there can be certain errors, certain mistakes, and how these errors and mistakes should be taken care of. I'm going to start with a small warm-up and open a poll session just to check that everybody is listening and can answer the poll question. And I'm going to launch the poll session now. A very simple and a very basic question that I would love you to look at and answer, all the attendees and listeners. You know, if you're familiar with passive fire protection, what it is, I'd love to know the answer. How many people in the audience are aware of passive fire protection, and what is a better enforcement methodology? Should stakeholders use a legal route? Should stakeholders use a financial route? Or probably you don't know what the question is all about, and that's fine. Very generic question, very open-ended. In your view, who should be fined in case there is a fire that happens in a building? Very open-ended. A lot of assumptions are possible about answering this question, but is it the architect? Is it the contractor? Is it the consultant? Is it the government? Or probably you do not know. I'm going to share the results later. I've seen the results. It's good to get the answers from all the people. I know that a few of you have not yet quoted or not yet put in your poll answers. Please do so before I close the poll question and we move forward towards today's content. So moving towards the topic of today, which is Fire and Life Safety Plan. And what is this Fire and Life Safety Plan, and why is it so important when we are talking about passive fire protection? And before I delve deeper into what is this Fire and Life Safety Plan, I want to kind of touch upon explaining the basis of Fire and Life Safety Plan, because the audience who's listening in today comes from many countries, variable backgrounds. Some of the people who are listening in to this awareness session about passive fire protection and conformity mechanisms comes from contracting, consulting, architectural background, insurance companies, and several other who are listening in today. So let me start with what is usually called as prescriptive methodology, which means it comes from past learnings, mistakes, analyzing what has happened, how accidents happened, why accidents happen, and it creates a construct or a concept called occupancy type. And almost all building codes and fire and life safety code use this as a grouping mechanism. The UAE Fire and Life Safety Code, for example, has over 50 different occupancy types. The National Building Code of India, as you can see on your screen, or the Saudi Building Code or the International Building Code use some of the groupings that you can see. What these groupings do, these groupings bring about a methodology of bringing together certain common aspects when it comes to how the valuation of the occupants is, how important the occupants are, or the people who are occupying a type of construction, or maybe what is stored inside a type of construction, what is its value, how risky it is. It also groups on who are the occupants, what is their awareness level, what is their readiness level, do they require any help when there will be a fire, would they know what to do when there will be a fire, and of course, location of the building type or the construction type, where exactly is it located, is it far away from a fire tender, if there is a fire, how it will be evacuated, if it will be evacuated, and so on and so forth. So the occupancy type typically groups on the risk profile of that building type. It groups on the readiness level and bases primarily these things and almost several other aspects which help arrive at designing something that will make sure that the loss to life and to loss to property is minimized. And you will understand through the course of the slides that how the risk of these groupings is different. And hence, when we need to design a plan to make sure that a fire does not cause damage, there is minimal loss of life, ideally no loss of life, minimal loss to property. What are the considerations and what are the aspects which are very, very important? And these aspects typically come from past learnings. So the building codes or the fire and life safety codes are almost like repositories of past learnings, analysis of accidents, as well as insights of new methodologies of constructions happening here or there in the world. And hence, when anybody is using a methodology to design a building where they need to make sure that fire and life safety is an important consideration, they use these codes almost as a starting point because they capture what all had gone wrong in the past. Mainly, and there are several aspects to designing a fire and life safety code. I'm going to touch up upon very few today, but it makes sure that there is some measure or some means of protection that is available in case there is an initiation of fire or growth of fire, and all the known mechanisms which need to be undertaken to make sure that the building is evacuated, for making sure that there is no loss of life, or the building enables compartmentalization of people, compartmentalization of important goods and property, so that all these goods, properties, life can be saved from fire. And then this fire and life safety plan, which is a design or which is which is almost like a guidance document, which helps throughout the course of planning, construction, as well as maintenance of any type of occupancy, forms almost like the baseline document, which will affect several decisions through the course of this of the construction, or not just construction, planning, construction, as well as occupation and maintenance. Let's kind of look at some examples of these occupancy types for you to get a better idea of how and why the fire and life safety plan may vary. What you can see on your screens is 4 different types of occupancies. There is a high risk, almost, which is a fuel station. There is a hospital, a school, a office complex. And the moment I put these into perspective, and you can almost close your eyes and start to imagine that what happens in case of a fire near or at a petrol station or a fuel station, what happens, what can happen if there is a fire inside a hospital, inside a school, inside a commercial complex. The behavior and the capability of people is different. The risk or the level of risk is different. And hence the methodology and means by which life safety, fire and life safety needs to be designed has to vary. Some of the basic concepts being to create compartments, compartmentalization, have a detailed, comprehensive active fire protection system. What is active fire protection system? I have covered these in great details in the past. What is active fire? What is passive fire protection? All mechanisms that sense a fire and act in case there is a fire by controlling or sending out a distress signal, sprinklers, detectors, and a long range of constructs which activate and make sure that a fire does not cause damage. How these to be designed, and same for a lot of passive fire protection methodology. All of these will vary depending on the occupancy type, and depending on all of this occupancy type, what will result is something which is called a fire and life safety plan. A fire and life safety plan can is a very comprehensive set of documents, drawings, and technical specifications, which at the beginning sets out a methodology by which there has to be assurance that fire does not happen. And there are detailed technical specifications which link with the drawings, and all these need to run throughout the course, right from planning, master planning, building and construction, when the house or building or office or occupancy type is occupied, and it details, these details are hence captured. People familiar with design and build, or people familiar with the whole construct of initiating a design right up to occupation and maintenance would understand that an extremely large number of stakeholders participate in several aspects of design and implementation and construction. And it is very, very critical that all these stakeholders have a keen understanding of the fire and life safety planning construct, why and how the fire and life safety planning is being done, and what are the key elements that will ensure that there is safety of life and fire accidents do not really happen. I am going to touch upon very, very briefly some of these aspects and link them along with different stakeholders who are responsible for ensuring the implementation of fire and life safety plan. And I'm also doing a kind of a generic view because the authorities having jurisdictions have different powers in different countries. People who are listening in and who have been listening in come from different countries. The jurisdictions are different. The fire laws are different. The liabilities and responsibilities and the way they are implemented in different countries are different. And hence, it is important to know what these entail, irrespective of whether it is the responsibility of the contractor or the consultant, or it is the responsibility of the owner. And in case there are failures, who takes a big hit? A brief insight into what some of the passive fire protection products and materials are and how they get linked up is important to know before we understand the correlation. Fire resistance, passive fire protection, compartments are kind of known. You have seen fire doors, partitions, glazing systems, but it is important to know and remember that how are these manufactured in factories which are susceptible to potential quality issues, potential supply chain issues, errors and mistakes, because these are building materials and people are involved heavily in taking several decisions before which the compartmentalization is brought to be, whether it is manufacturing of the products, whether it is installation of the products or maintenance of the products. The same level of challenge exists in reaction to fire properties when we are talking of interior finishing materials, whether these are carpets, false ceiling, wall coverings, upholstery, or artificial plants, decorations, televisions, so many things that potentially form a big fire load inside any type of occupancy. I have covered extensively in the past what these are and how these have a massive impact on potential fire risks inside an occupancy. A much debated and discussed subject is fire stopping as part and a very critical element of compartmentalization. And because all these services, utilities are an integral part of any type of occupancy, we need the internet, we need the cables, we need the electricity, we need fresh air, we need water. And to get all of these things inside a compartment, the MEP contractors have to come in with their destructive drills and hammers, and they come in and they break open all the very well designed, very well installed compartmentalization. And it is extremely important and critical to understand that not only when the fire stopping is being done, it needs to be done as per proven systems, proven combinations of materials, often proven with the help of listings and listing details. It becomes equally important that an independent inspection is done to make sure that these installations are brought back or re-rated to the original rating by correctly installing the right set of materials. Because if this is not done, then the huge amount of time, effort, energy, and money spent in compartmentalization all goes completely waste. Now, with this understanding of several nuances and possible errors, let's look at who are the decision makers in this process. In a typical occupancy that is getting ready, any of it, whether it's a hospital or a mall, or it's a residential complex or a high-rise building, typically you would have these 5 stakeholders: the developer or the owner, an architect and a consultant, contractors, and material suppliers. What are the relationships between these? Many of you may be familiar with this, but the developer or the building owner is almost where everybody wants to go to. Architects, contractors, consultants, they will constantly try to market and position themselves as stakeholders and service providers who know their job very, very well. They will have various means and mechanisms to credential their work, whether it is designing or contracting or the technical skills that will enable the contractor to build what the architect or the developer has dreamed up of. Then there is a second layer. The second layer is all the efforts done by the material manufacturers and suppliers, because they need to be in the eyes of architects, they need to be in the eyes of contractors, they need to be the contractors also need to be in the eyes of architects and consultants. So if you see, there is this very, very complicated web or maze where who is influencing whom, why is someone influencing someone else, and who needs to have independence from the other is very, very important to understand and imagine. And then who gets paid by whom? This direction of money flow sets in almost the most important aspect of assurance or making sure that whatever is desired, which means the planning and implementation of a good fire and life safety plan, how can it be controlled and how it can be assured. Let me open a quick poll, and I would want all the people in the audience to try and answer this very, very simple poll, not complicated, and it will take you probably a second so that I can get a good feeler of how many people in the audience are from which background and what is it that I should emphasize upon and who are the stakeholders that I should not criticize too much. I would urge you to quickly fill in the ticks and let's move forward to the last phase of today's discussion to see and understand how all of these aspects, stakeholders come together and make sure that the buildings and occupancies that we are involved in are fire safe. I'll give another 10 seconds for all the attendees to fill in the primary role of what you do and who you are. All right, few people left. I can see that there are lots of consultants in the team, in the audience, few contractors. There are also some developers and material suppliers, and not that many, but they are there. And it's good to see the authorities having jurisdiction, government representatives, many of them who are listening in today's session. All right, let me close this poll. Moving to what is it that all of these different stakeholders can do. The different stakeholders that you see on your screen primarily come from the chapter 18 of the UAE Fire and Life Safety Code, a very, very good compilation which defines roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders which have a very, very key input, a very, very important space in ensuring the fire and life safety of any occupancy. And for anybody who would want a copy, please feel free to message on the chat or send out an email to me, and I will be happy to share a copy of the UAE Fire and Life Safety Code, which gives some very, very good insights to authorities having jurisdiction outside the UAE, as well as property owners, developers, to see some of those aspects that often get missed. Now, who should be made responsible for the fire and life safety plan? Who should approve it? Is it the fire department or the civil defense? Is it their responsibility? Is it some ministry in your country? Is it the insurance industry? Or should the owners be aware of the fire and life safety plan, or the contractors? And there is no straight answer to this question, unfortunately, because each country is structured in a different way. Each region, each contract, each type of occupancy have different stakeholders, but what remains absolutely common is liability. The laws could be different, but there is always a commercial value of the contract, a commercial value of the occupancy that is created. And in case there is a fire, in case there is an accident, there are certain stakeholders who will get a bigger damage, who may lose their reputation, and hence, very, very unfortunately, more often than not, it is the insurance industry who ends up paying for someone else's faults. And hence, it is very, very important that the insurance industry is aware of not only the key aspects of fire and life safety plan and their implementation, but also the interrelationship between the different stakeholders and whether independence really existed as part of the contract. You can only imagine that reputation plays such an important role. If you have a very large oil and gas company whose building, office building, catches fire, what is at stake when it comes to their reputation? The questions of whether the oil and gas company of a given wherever, it couldn't ensure fire and life safety in their own office, then are they able to do it for all the areas where they really need to take care of? The same goes for hospitals. The same goes for malls. The same goes for, very, very importantly, hotels. And you would realize some of the large international hotel chains have their own rules and their own requirements, which means if I go back to what we were talking of as prescriptive design or design coming in from the past learnings, which are capsulated into building codes, whether these building codes have been written in North America or Europe or United Kingdom or India or Saudi Arabia or UAE, wherever these building codes have been written in, they capture some of the possible risks. But very often, organizations, businesses whose reputation is very, very much at stake would have their own rules, would have their own building codes, their own minimum requirements, specifically on those fire risks, which have in the past led to loss of reputation of their infrastructure. So without naming specific hotel chains or international hotel chains, but people in the audience who have dealt with several of them would know that the requirements of the state, the requirements of the country, the requirements of the jurisdiction are often smaller as compared to the requirements of many of these brands who would not give the right of operation until some of those critical aspects related to fire and life safety are ticked or not. And this is where there is this need for assurance of fire and life safety plans implementation that comes in. In the UAE, as well as internationally, there are several tools which are very, very evolved, which are very, very available and out there for anybody who has an intention to make sure that the assurance mechanism is played out effectively and the implementation of the fire and life safety plan is done correctly or not. Let's take an example of a fire door which is one of the basic building blocks of ensuring compartmentalization. These stakeholders could vary in the country that you may be in, but typically the fire and life safety plan, which is drawn out of the occupancy tribe, the fire and life safety plan, which is based on the learnings and the past accidents, will come up with something called a door schedule. What is a door schedule? Say you're in a mall or say you're in a hotel, and the door schedule will say, if it's a 300-room hotel, I don't know, 400 fire rated doors of type A, another 200 or another 50 doors, which could be shafts or wherever, fire rated. So the door schedule gives a list of door types and the fire rating requirements. And when I'm saying door types, it would not just say it's a single door or a double door, it would define everything that forms the basis of an RFQ document that the contractor is going to send out saying, I want to procure 800 fire rated doors. These are the technical specifications. And along with these technical specifications comes the requirement of fire resistance rating. 60 minutes, 45 minutes, 30 minutes, 120 minutes. All of these requirements stem from the past understanding, the past learnings, which form the basis of what is the occupancy type, how long should the fire rating be there, what would be the time to evacuate a hotel, mall, etc. And this is where it becomes very important. And anybody who is buying fire doors or anything related to fire protection should be very, very careful. Who are you depending on? I have talked in great length about what certification and listing is in the past webinar sessions. And when it comes to fire rated doors, it is very, very critical that if a door is tested and that's it, it has probably no link with what is going to be supplied. If a door is certified and listed, then you are in a much better place, because the certification and listing of the door will give you a massive amount of detail that you can use not only to make sure and inspect what is the door that is actually eventually coming at the construction site, because it will tell you who the manufacturer is, where is the manufacturer based, what is the test method to which the product was tested, what is the fire resistance rating, and then it goes on to limit a large list of limitations, which means the third-party certification body takes limited assurance that until or unless the door is of a certain type, which is detailed, the door has been built using defined dimensions, defined material, defined hardware, then only the product is said to be certified and the assurance mechanism fulfilled. And this is the reason why when anybody is procuring fire doors or any such element which is being relied on, there has to be a mechanism in place to make sure that the evidence submitted, which is the certification and listing probably, aligns with the door schedule. If the door schedule talks about double door fire rated doors and the certification evidence is of a single door, then it doesn't quite align. So you probably need to do more fire testing or get some engineering evaluation or extrapolations for the certification body or some third party to give you the assurance that a given door supplier will be able to supply doors which will be fire rated or which will fulfill the requirements of the door schedule. And this is not just doors. Almost any and every aspect which will ensure that the fire and life safety plan is implemented correctly has certification and listing evidence available on several third-party certification bodies, directories. And I encourage anybody and everybody to look back and look through these mechanisms which are so available. If you pick up your mobile phone as an example, and you just look back, if you see a CE mark as an example, you'll see a 5-digit number under the CE mark. Look up that 5-digit number and see who is the certification body. Look up the details and you will find everything. Where is the product coming from? Who is the manufacturer? And if there is a mismatch, then something's wrong, for sure. And it is important to understand how these things operate. And only then can various stakeholders bring about the correct incentives. As an example, in the UAE, the Fire and Life Safety Code defines how the drawings should be submitted, what are the level of details which should be there in the Fire and Life Safety Plan, and these details hence get frozen. The Chapter 18 of the UAE Fire and Life Safety Code defines the liabilities of each stakeholder across the spectrum of contractors, consultants, fire consultants, owners, etc. But in another location, as a stakeholder to ensuring the fire and life safety plan, you have the tools which are available, which will provide you the assurance that what you are asking for is actually getting delivered. As an example, if you see cladding, something which is massively debated and discussed, and if you see the example, what you see on your screen is an aluminum composite panel. Even when the film of the aluminum composite panel is removed, on the back side of the aluminum composite panel, or the ACP, the certification body will have a number encrypted. And this certification number will lead you to the directory of the certification body. So if required, as part of the contract, if you ask for these things for levels of assurance, all the data is available. The inspection body, whether that is that of the consultant, that of the government, that of the contractor, whoever has the ownership, whoever has the liability contractually, can always look into these evidences which are available. So it is very, very important to make sure that all these tools of assurance which are out there in the public should be correctly referenced, should be correctly used. Because if we rewind back to where we started from, the codes which are, or the performance-based design of somebody going further ahead from the codes, learning more from what is documented from past mistakes, would initiate the fire and life safety plan. We'll give you a guidance to make sure that the fire and life safety plan is designed. But it is the contracts, which are the commercial contracts, which are the most binding and the most powerful aspect of ensuring the fire and life safety plan, because it is the contract which will have linkages with the law, with the jurisdiction. It will always have a financial implication. And all these contracts should make sure that the tools that are available for validating and checking the assurance are correctly used by the stakeholders who have been made responsible. And this is very, very important, because it is the contracts that helps you drive down the responsibilities. Now, the law may be different in a country. The commercial value, or who takes on the commercial value, could be different. There are countries where contractors need to give a performance guarantee that the building's structure or fire safety or certain aspects will function for 10 years. And they are responsible for it. But there are countries where such laws do not exist, where the contractor has very, very limited liability. And if the contractor has a limited liability, then it is the problem of the owner. Is it the problem of the tenant? Is it the problem of the insurance company? Depending on where you are, which jurisdiction you are, it is important to understand these things and then make sure that the technical specifications, which form the core implementation methodology of the fire and life safety plan, are correctly written. What you see on your screen is a sample specification coming out of a project. And it's very interesting. I'll read out some parts of this sample specification. Performance of panels and fire resistant assemblies under fire or high temperature exposure shall be as follows, and meeting the recent civil defense regulations. Recent is what? There is no quantification. To meet time rating indicated on drawings and specifications as verified by a recognized certification or 45. This is probably a typo error, being a UL rated assembly. Just one commercial entity is being pointed to. And or satisfactory to the consultant and other authorities having jurisdiction. So if the technical specifications are not stringent enough, are not airtight enough, are not clear enough, then absolutely there are loopholes that contractors, subcontractors, material suppliers will find any and every loophole to make sure that their liability is limited. Because you can only get what you ask for. And if you ask for less, and if you ask for something very, very confusing, then you will get something very, very confusing. So I'm going to very briefly give some points which you can use almost as pointers to make sure that if you are one of these stakeholders, or if it is in your interest that the fire and life safety plan is good, and the fire and life safety plan is implemented correctly, then make sure that you use the right tools of assurance when it comes to implementation of fire and life safety. Certification and listing, which a certification body needs to be accredited to 17 or 65 as a construct should be used. There are several jurisdictions, for example, the Singapore Civil Defense or the UAE Civil Defense, as an authority having jurisdiction, go so many steps ahead to not only point to 17 or 65 as a criteria, which means 17 or 65 as an ISO standard, which is used to accredit certification bodies. Some of the governments go ahead and say that type 5 or type 3 type of certification, which is how the certification program is run by the third-party certification body, is also defined. So if you are a fire officer as part of a state in India, which has a different fire act than the adjacent state, you should define what is the minimum requirement as a method of assurance. The contractor needs to submit evidence of certification and listing along with inspection reports as part of document submission dossier. Until or unless this is asked for, it will never be available. Until or unless it is defined whose responsibility it is to get the evidence of certification and listing and inspection, you will not get it. And this documentation becomes so important. Once a month, I get a call from a building owner or an FM company here who says, my insurance premium is increasing because I have no evidence available for one or the other aspect related to fire safety of my building. So it's so interesting to see who suffers towards the end when you are taking over as the FM company. What all should you ask for? And then all of this evidence, which is available, listing reports, accreditation reports, inspection reports, should be maintained and asked for in the correct way. And then lack of this implementation, lack of this documentation should be linked with some penalty. Because until or unless there is a financial linkage to these requirements, you will probably never get them. So with that, I bring this session, this series of fire and life safety awareness to a close. I'll open a small poll to ask you that the next series that we will launch, most likely end of September, is going to focus at certain aspects, and the chat window is open for you to give any other suggestions if you think that the next series should be about, and what is it that I should or we should focus on, and that is very, very welcome. And the Q&A is open. I would wait for any specific questions that you may have. I'm going to share the YouTube link of our channel. It can be looked up. If you just search for Thomas Bell-Wright YouTube, you will find our link. But by Sunday, you will get the email with the link. And any questions that are I think I've probably overshot today's time, but I'm going to take one question. If there is any burning question that I can answer, I would look forward to the question. Good stuff. So thank you very, very much for attending the session today. It is a pleasure to see everybody and listen to questions coming in. I'm not able to take all the questions today as we have come to a close and the time is very, very limited. I have some engagements as well lined up today. And I'm going to reply back maybe in an email to some of the questions that came in, because these are long questions and I probably need a little longer to answer these. So I thank you very, very much for attending this session today. I hope it was fun for all of you and informative. And please stay tuned to our LinkedIn page, and I'm going to send an update for the next series, which will most likely be looking at some site issues, and we will get some third-party experts talking about practical problems in installation, practical problems in implementation of passive fire protection at site. Looking forward to seeing all of you again. Thank you very, very much for attending this session today.